Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Bambu panel discussions where we talk about a range of digital wealth initiatives. Today, we're going to kind of look at this idea of hyper-personalization, and we're going to do that with the two guests that we have today. So what I'd like to do is we're going to go through these kind of three key points, and they are here. So we'll introduce the panel, and before we do that, we'll have a look at the questions for the panel. So we can go to the next slide. Fantastic. Okay, so let's do first. Francis, why don't you introduce yourself first?
Sure. Thanks, Nat. My name is Francis. I'm the head of digital solutions at Templeton Fund Management Company. So my previous life has seen me traveling around product management roles in banks. Also spent a bit of time setting up a startup with SC Ventures, focusing on retirement planning. So my focus now with Templeton is to go with them on a journey to digitizing our approach to asset management.
Great. Thank you, Francis. And Francis is based in Singapore. And Calvin?
Right. Hey, thanks, Nat. Hey, hi, everyone. So I'm Calvin. Today I'm actually head of digital for RG Group. Essentially, responsible for digital strategy and development, covering the group community banking, which covers both retail and SME. I have more than 20 years in the banking environment around the Asia Pacific region. So largely I've been worked with HSBC, OCBC, and Stanchart in the past as well. So it's great to be here. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you, Calvin. And what we've seen, I think for both Francis and Calvin, they both worked in banking, but also on the product and digital side as well. So it can give us a good overview of that. Okay, we're going to dive in and just look at the kind of three main questions that we are going to look at today. So if we look at the three different main questions, the first one, the idea is how do we transform financial advice with this hyper-personalization? So what we're looking at is the problem statement really comes from, I think we all know that there's been a lot of kind of standard products. Yet today, the banks are faced with this change in how wealth is consumed, whether it's the B2C apps, whether it's the e-commerce or the wallet platforms. They're now offering wealth, financial advice, and access to saving and investment that previously wasn't a competitor to the traditional financial parties, to the traditional financial banks. And so I think what we want to look at is how can the financial institutions change that? Francis and Calvin have some different views on that. So if we jump into the different questions that we have, if we can put those up, the different questions, that would be great. Okay, so we're going to look at these ideas. What's the thoughts on this? And indeed, I would like your view of what hyper-personalization means, because it means different things to everybody. Some examples of how that personalized financial advice works. I know, Francis, in particular, some of the work you did with Autumn on there, you were looking directly at that. And really, how is it going to change over the next 5 years? Okay, let's dive into the first question there. And maybe we'll, if we put up the first question, and then maybe Francis, we'll throw that over to you as the first one. So, you've, as you mentioned, you've been around products, startup, now at an asset manager. Francis, what's your view on this hyper-personalization? And would like just to get your sense of it.
Oh, hyper-personalization. I've been thinking about this, right? And it's great that you asked us to define it, because I was wondering how we should start tackling this. I think, right, hyper-personalization means, well, even before we get into what it means, the prerequisite to even start to properly hyper-personalize everything is that we need to be able to predict our clients properly, whether we need to know everything that has happened to the client, to be able to guess at everything that can happen, so that we can use that hyper-personalization to aim for the best version of what will happen to the clients, right? Because ultimately our objective is to use this hyper-personalization capabilities to maximize what we can get out of finance, out of our propositions to the users. So in that aspect, that level of personalization, understanding where our customers come from, is great. It's the only logical way to go, right? Because thinking about just the three of us on this panel, we are different, right? We have different starting points. We have different objectives. Ned, I may never be a CEO like you. Calvin, I may never have end up traveling the whole of Asia. It's hard to say, right? So even with hyper-personalization of services for a person like myself, nobody will be able to predict where I will be in 5 years or 10 years. There is a bit of customization that is needed in order for our solutions to be optimized to each of us. So naturally, some level of customization will be required. But here's where we get to the hyper-personalization bit of it, the hyper, right? Because from my point of view, I've been getting to the point of thinking that personalization, yes, it's great, but hyper-personalization is maybe a different matter altogether, because hyper-personalization means you require a hyper level of detail in terms of what we understand about the client, right? And we know the risks behind knowing and holding too much information, because, well, you become a hot target for certain activities. So it doesn't necessarily lead the best outcome for people. And, well, we get to the point of potentially false precision or spurious accuracy, because predictions are always to a margin of error, right? And hyper-personalization to the point of hyper-precision means we would precisely be wrong all the time.
Really,
So-
I think it's a very good point in terms of, do we want hyper-personalization? And as you correctly say, you have to give a large amount of data, and very detailed data, because you can only personalize if the person is willing to give the data. Obviously, if it's something as straightforward as salary, it's a bit more straightforward. I mean, maybe Calvin, what's your thoughts on that? Because I think what Francis is saying is right. We all want some personalization. Do we actually want hyper-personalization? Does it get too intrusive?
Yeah, I do agree with what Francis mentioned just now, right? The thing is, some customers or some clients essentially would think that they lose some bits of privacy when any organization, not just banks, right, for that matter, get to personalize in terms of offerings or even communication. From a client perspective, is that, hey, does it mean that I'm actually divulging too much of information? Where did you get those information from that perspective, right? I think it's great for us so that we from an organization standpoint, or I mean, generally, what happens is if we provide all the right messages at the right time when customer needs it, we assume customer needs it, but it's very much dependent on the interaction with, between us and the client to see whether the client actually needs it. So in a nutshell, is that it's two ways, it's not always one way, right? Because client can actually provide us the right information for us to be it process, manipulate, combine, and whatnot, right? So our analytics would do all the magic and all that. But at the point of time when customer receive the information, it's a question of whether do they want it at the time. Because occasionally too much information, I think like what Francis said, it comes with a risk. It can be multiple type of risk. Yeah.
And it makes sense. It's too much information. And maybe, Francis, just to follow on from what you were saying, is it like too much financial advice? Because the idea is, does hyper-personalization lead to better financial advice? Can it be too much? Because financial advice can be confusing. I mean, the logical, if it's hyper-personalized, it should be better. But maybe that doesn't always play out, Francis. What's your thoughts?
Exactly. I completely agree with you, because it may be, fine and justifiable at some point for a significant number of people to receive the same advice and recommendations, because we want to account for a margin of error in prediction. But if we go too far just to prove that this is hyper-personalized, then we will always force ourselves to a level of precision that's always wrong.
It's a good point. I mean, I think it's interesting to see. Maybe, like, I'm thinking about the second question that we have. It kind of leads on from this idea around this in financial advice. So if we can just put up the second question here, and maybe we can take that over to Calvin. So let's think about it. So we're trying to determine what is hyper-personalized. Does it work? Maybe, Calvin, can you give us an example? You've worked, as you say, whether it's in touch and go, RHB. What is your example of maybe how it works today and how it can then work in the future?
I guess how it works today is that, from a financial advice perspective, let's just take that, right? There's basically the RM knows more about the client than as a bank knows more about the client, because there is a personal relationship with them, right? we know when, let's say, the child, their children graduating or getting married or not, right? So then we can actually congratulate them or not. So the first level of interaction is always RM, right? But the bank as a whole, we will never have that kind of information to think about it. So then the question is, we would like to have that kind of information upfront so that we can actually send the right, be it advice or messages to the client. But the question then is, do we need to do that? Right? Is that level of information is necessary? So that's one. There's more from, retaining and maintaining clients' relationship. And the second part about recommending products or advices to client, it takes a lot more than just certain interactions, certain transaction from the client. It's more of, in the past, what the client has done, what is their profile, and how do we actually provide and recommend certain products at the right time and when they need it, right? So that's a challenge that I guess most organizations will have today is, mixing information, mixing third-party related data so that we are able to provide the most informed or advice to clients. I think that will be where we can do.
And it's an interesting point you say to recommend the product. I think there's a kind of a logical challenge here that we should be recommending advice and not product, but the industry is structured around product on top of advice. And maybe Calvin, just keeping it with you for one more, just to think about that. So I used to be a financial advisor, and I would, long ago, 30 years ago, because I'm old, and I was always told there's always a right product for the client. But really what they were saying is make sure they buy a product, right? And I do think, that's an industry standard. I'm wondering, does digital give us the opportunity to be, unemotional about it? Because as an advisor, there's different constructs around there. So maybe if we're thinking about the future of it, I don't know, Calvin, I always think there's going to be advisors, but I do think for mass retail, because they don't get great advice today, I do think there's an opportunity for digital to really give fair, unbiased. I'm not saying it's not unbiased, but you know what I'm trying to say.
I know what I'm trying to say. Yeah. I mean, that's right in the sense that, you have different segment of clients in this case, right? The ultra high net worth and then masses. I mean, let's just put in two groups just to make it easier. Of course, ultra high net worth, you have the RM clients. RMs basically already, servicing them with tools and whatnot, able to tell and even provide advices as to when they need it, right? But you have the masses where they want to get into the overall investment products, but they don't have the luxury of getting an RM to service them by sheer volume. So that could be one. On the other hand, is that, the upcoming, young, also young and wealthy, but they may not need an RM to service them because I know more than you do, right? Internet is my source of information and all that, right? So that could be one thing. And the other thing is, it depends on where they navigate around the internet. We sort of know how they, we can predict in a sense behavior, the interest, propensity, and so on and so forth. There are a lot of models out there that we can actually apply, right? So yeah, I mean, there's no straight answer to your question. It's actually, how do you want to accommodate the solution to the right segment of clients?
Yeah, it's a good look. I don't think, as you said, there's one single answer there. I mean, Francis, you've worked on some solutions. You've in your previous role, you've worked on that. So maybe your thoughts about where is personalized financial advice today? How well is it doing? What is it doing? And where is it going to in the future?
Sure. So yes, Ned, we did have had some conversations about this in the past, relating to personalized advice and the potential drawbacks of where we are in the industry right now. So I really want to build on what Calvin said as well. I completely agree with your points on relationship managers handling the relationship. And well, if we really think about it to some degree, right, in the past, it was extremely personalized. And even now you see the ability for some segments of it to be personalized. It's just a matter of changing requirements in order to have personalized information, right? Because, well, Ned, you might know more about this, but maybe in the 1980s, 1970s, when the world was smaller, right? You did not have to be as wealthy, potentially to receive personalized advice. You would have the same level as a private banking client right now with a decent amount of wealth at that time. But now, because technology has come in as a great enabler, we've found amazing ways of scaling to the point that, we've started commoditizing everything again, and we're just offering the same solution to everybody using technology, right? So we are seeing personalization becoming a hot topic again, right? But the thing is, with relationship management and how we can get back to personalized advice, I feel it's more of two things, right? The first one is in terms of overcoming incentives, like something you alluded to just now, incentives of the human relationship managers who are offering the personalized advice, and in terms of education of our clients. So if you talk about incentives first, naturally, if we're able to use technology, like for example, the kind of things you're building over there at Bambu, to help replace or augment some of the capabilities that these relationship managers are generating for our clients these days, right? Then we're not beholden to having to pay incentives for proper advice, for proper knowledge. And that means everybody can have the same level of great personalized advice without having to pay as much for it, which means you don't need to be wealthy to not get scammed, right? The second thing about education is I feel like personalized advice specifically for how we can use it in the future is in terms of thinking of it as a wealth continuum. So like Kelvin was saying earlier, you've got people who come up and work hard, right? You start entering banking at a personal banking level. You eventually become emerging affluent. You work your way up to affluence, and then you hopefully get to private banking, family office levels, right? But it takes a lot of time for an RM or for technology for now to understand where exactly you are. And you need to know where you are in order to provide the right level of education. Because if I were to give information, education about complex financial products, options, and everything else to a person who's at personal banking level, then that's not appropriate, right? At the same time, if hypothetically, and I hope this were the case, I've got a few $1 billion sitting in my bank, don't tell me about deposit products. I'm not interested, right? I've got so much money to throw at, I'll just randomly give you $1 million and do something about it. So technology could be the difference in the way we approach financial education, right? Understanding where people are easily, and hopefully that wealth continuum can stretch beyond a person's lifespan, right? We can look at multi-generational products where we understand everything about your family because, your family has already been in the system. We know that wealth is being transferred down. We can target you at the right time so you never have a chance to get unfavorably advised by humans.
Exactly. And look, there's lots of good human advice, but I like this idea of wealth continuum, right? Like this idea that, we're all at different phases, right? You're accumulating spending, retiring, decumulating where you are. And, the technology should be able to know. I do feel particularly that this idea of open banking APIs, so one of the challenge today, I think, in personalized finance is if you go to any robo-advisory solution, it asks you, how much do you have? And if you don't put it in 100% correct, how's it going to give you personalized advice, right? If you only put in one little bit. Whereas, I don't know whether it's 5, 10, or 50 years in the future, the concept of open banking APIs, all of your data is available at the touch of a button, so you truly can get it. I think that's important because you're right. If the technology actually knew everything about you, it should be able to tell you, hey, you're a billionaire, here's an option product, you don't need goals, or you're 22 and just starting on that. So, but maybe just one more quick question on this one before we turn to question number 3, and maybe Francis with you. Do you think the future of personalized advice is getting better for the customer or better for the financial industry? So who's the winner out of this? Is it the end customer is going to have a better experience, or are financial institutions winning, or is everybody winning out of this?
Yeah, I don't think this is a zero-sum game at all. So this goes back to exactly, I think, why all of us are in this industry and looking at this particular segment right now, right? Because we all believe that there is a way for everybody to benefit at the same time. In recent years, maybe even decades, people have been losing trust in banks. And that's because of the lack of well, the ability to deliver advice, personalized advice in a reliable manner, potentially. I'm not saying it's always unreliable, but even if it's for me, right, if there's a 1% chance of me getting scammed, I would be a lot more hesitant to go near it. Whereas if we all had the assurance that, these algorithms are all properly and reliably vetted, and we can have a way of getting second opinions safely without additional cost, without having to be a multimillionaire in order to get people looking after your interests properly rather than their own, then we all can benefit because everybody gets better utilization of their financials. From an economics perspective, better allocation of capital means ultimately better outcomes for everybody.
Well, Calvin, do you agree? Is that ultimately better for both the industry and the consumers?
Well, I do agree with what Francis said. Just on top of that as well, it's actually hyper-personalization essentially enable us to sort of get ourselves prepared, with the banks, or as well as to prepare in the sense of when customer needs it at the right time, at the right moment, we'll be there and provide the right advice, not necessarily products. So right now is that, right now it's that it could be the last 10 years, last 20 years in a sense. It all very much dependent on the relationship between RMs and whatnot. Right? There's always a time gap. But when you talk about at the spur of a moment where the client has, I'm not sure, strike a lottery, win a deal, have $1 million in a bank account, for example, at the spur of a moment, then it's like, okay, what do I do with it? Right? With hyper-personalization, either be it through robo-advisory, through whatever it means, even with the RM able to sort of get a prompt to say that, Mr. So-and-so, it has this much of amount. Perhaps you can make a recommendation on these products, or perhaps you can advise him on this item, right? So it sort of make that process a bit faster compared to in the past where it takes a while for RM to, even from an analytics team, to actually churn out the right recommendation.
Yeah, like it's combining some of those thoughts. I appreciate, Francis, you thought I was there in the 70s. I was, but I wasn't working then. But I was working in the 80s, so I will take that. But I do remember when I was working as a financial advisor, in the newspaper, so kind of pretty much before the internet, there was a guy who won the lottery. And his name was, I don't remember, John Smith. And so we went to the phone book, like the physical phone book, right? And you called him because, and it was instant, personalized, hyper-personalized financial advice. Hi, John Smith. You thought you won $1 million. I've called you. And of course, his response was, you're the 50th guy to call me today because his name's in the paper and his data is there. And I think, in reality, obviously that's kind of the edge case, the one guy who wins the million. But in reality, whether you're starting your first job, getting your first paycheck, the best time to get financial advice is when you get your first paycheck. When you're 22, good habits start early. And if you could be getting, of course, I understand as a financial advisor, you don't want to call the 22-year-old with their first job because their pay packet's near and they're not going to make much money from it. But in reality, a digital advisor, I know the economics are not there. I agree. I think there is a win-win here, but it's a difficult one because you've got to invest in it. As we all know, you guys work at financial institutions. Building tech isn't cheap, and the returns on it are challenging. Maybe we'll put up question 3 here because I think it follows on from there. So let's put up that next question. Let's see. Here we go. Fantastic. Thank you, Adam. So it's kind of following on, but maybe we can focus more on the wealth management side, and you can take that from whatever side you like. Is it asset? How is it changing asset managers? How is it changing the bank, the customers? I mean, I already think so. I started Bambu 6 years ago, and already we've seen massive changes, in wealth management. Like, I think just for example, a thing like Stashaway 6 years ago would never have got to $1 billion of AUM. It just wouldn't have. Like, it just wouldn't have happened. Whereas today, I don't know if that 1 or 2 billion it has. But maybe Calvin, throwing it over to you. How's it, if you have your crystal ball and you've thought about it?
I wish I have a crystal ball on that. But, 5 years, to me, 5 years is too long. When I talk to guys, we look at the next 2-3 years because technology changed too fast. you have StashAway, and then you will have some other organization that come in as well. I mean, just an example, right? In the past, when we thought Robinhood, it's like, wow, that's game changer. And it did, right? It's game changer from that perspective. But if you look at it, no one can really tell what's going to happen in the next 5 years. But in terms of hyper-personalization, it's that we're going to look at it from maybe a different angle. Not so much from wealth management. We know wealth management from a product, it remains as it is. It's how we service customer. And from a bank as well, is what sort of product and advice we are able to make it available, faster, accurate. It may not be 100% accurate, but to some extent that we're able to provide relevant advice that the client needs. I think what would be imperative is actually, moving to a world where cookieless is going to be the challenge for everyone to actually, get to know more about clients, right? Because that's just, like I said earlier in the call, is that there's just so much we know about client, and to the extent the client actually tell you. But if you take away RMs, it's actually, will the client tell us as an organization as a whole? We wouldn't know. So the only way for us to get to know the clients actually is for them to give us consent to say that, look, here's my information. I'm interested in this, through that, right? Take a look at my profile. And then, come back with some advice, personalized advice where you think that it's necessarily suitable for me.
Yeah, I think it's right. I think I like this idea of the cookieless, how technology is and where that's going to be. Francis, what's your thoughts on that kind of future of the wealth management?
So I was honestly doing a bit of research about what things have been like in the past before we can start predicting the future, right? And interestingly, I came across this article in 1989 from BCG talking about segment of one. So this may be one of the first times, I don't know, right, talking about how hyper-personalization actually began 10 years ago, according to the article, which was in 1979. And that article later went on to talk about how, technology has progressed and we have started to scale things up. It seems to me like this is potentially a pattern that we could observe where naturally with demand movements, we see people going right now towards personalization, because over the past 10 or 20 years, we've been scaling so much that everybody has been agglomerated into the same segments, right? So we're going to the point where we have lost our individuality, personalization. I keep tripping over these words. Anyway, we've lost it to the point that, personalization is something to be desired at this point. We may come to a point over the next 5 or 10 years, right, where this comes back the other way around, where we start consolidating, right? But I feel like if we had our way, if the three of us and our counterparts within the industry, right, did well enough, this consolidation would happen in a different way. And I see it more as a matter of, if hyper-personalization became so ubiquitous and easy to access, with companies like Bambu providing it to companies who wanted to do something like that, especially the up-and-coming digital banks, then of course, what we would see is it becomes a matter of convenience, because personalization would be available everywhere. It would be commoditized, and fee margins would be so compressed to the point that it may not make much of a difference to anyone anymore. And we're just going to see whoever has the most data being the single point of contact for anybody, because if you have more data, you personalize better. And yeah, that's the trend I think could happen in the next 5 years. Of course, if I turn out to be absolutely right, then let's revisit this in 5 years.
We'll take a recording of this, Francis. If it's right in 5 years, we'll post it with a time stamp. But
probably with another $1 billion in your bank account.
Let's see. Hopefully not because of inflation.
That is true. But I like, so my co-founder, Aki, who reads deeply about many subjects, always is a big believer in that history is the real guidance of it. And, it's funny, we think that, tech or personalization just started, but 89 said it was 10 years ago. I like this idea of segment of one. But to your point, you said who has the most data. Does that mean that the super apps win out? So if we look, whether it's Grab, Gojek, Tencent, Alibaba, to a degree, are we saying that ultimately, whether it's wealth management or other services, it all migrates to the people who can personalize the most? Because I think if we look at a bank, really a bank's, it's got some of your data, but it doesn't know, more about your wants and desires and what you actually want to do. Whereas maybe a Google, a Facebook, or a Tencent or an Ally, to this segment of one, Francis. So it's a logical conclusion. I hope it's not that there's one single app that we all subscribe to, because that would be too dystopian. I don't think we need to end up there. But what's your thoughts about that? Where does it trend to if you're looking back at history and where we're going now?
I think the ultimate modifier in this equation is trust. It may not necessarily be a super app. It may not be Grab. It has ceased to be Facebook, right? But at one point of time, we could have seen that going that way, but trust was the main factor in them losing their advantage. And I think that's the only way forward. We've got to see who's the player right now that is able to get the trust of the consumers, because with that naturally flows in the data. It's no longer a market where you can just throw money and buy information about a person. It's got to be obtained willingly. And that's who I would place my bets on. Anybody who can gain the trust of consumers.
I must admit, I think as I've built Bambu and talked to been lucky to talk to asset managers and banks or whatever, I remember maybe 5 years ago saying to asset managers, who is your person that is selling your products into the super app? You should be putting your funds on there. Now you don't know which is the right one, which gets trust, whether it's Facebook or TikTok's been selling wealth management. Who would have thought that 5 years ago, right? That would have been a big call. But look, there's no doubt that trust is super important there, from that point. Calvin, just following up on Francis's point, is it whoever, because banks have trust, they've had a hard time, but we still trust banks, right? We might not love our bank, but we trust them. That's my view. I don't know, you have a different view. Yes, we grumble a bit and we don't love them a bit. And that's why the digital banks are starting with better customer experience, smarter data. Maybe that's where it's come in. Calvin, what's your thoughts on how banks going to survive in that?
Having started my career in banking back in 2001 and to today, I can actually sort of comment to say that 2001, we don't really have digital banking back then. As the internet banking, mobile and whatnot, right? Everything has pretty much, over the branch, over the counter, and ATMs. ATMs, maybe mid to late 90s, it seems to be very advanced, and you don't want to withdraw money through ATMs. You're right. So trust needs to be built. I guess is incrementally. It's easy to lose a trust, and it's difficult to build one actually. So it's the same as when we first launched internet banking back in the early 2000s as well. Customers in general, they sort of fearful of digital, right? So similarly, when it comes to hyper-personalization, when it comes to wealth management products or anything at all, I think we need to continue to drive the kind of message to client or customers in this case that we are here for you, and we need to walk the talk, and we do walk the talk in the sense that we will offer you the product, we offer you advice, we'll be there to help you by any means when you need it. Trust in this case in the industry basically spread across multiple banks. You will have digital bank come on board, providing the best in class user experience and turnaround time services and all that. They will have their own challenges and opportunity at the same time. So it's really up to the client and customers in this case. What do they need at the point of time? Who can serve them? I think that's the real question.
Yeah. The power is more with the customer today than ever before. It used to be harder to move your funds. It used to be harder if you had small amounts. I think, customers will really vote, I think.
That's true. And then, it's make it so easy for you to just refinance, for example, right? From the mortgage, from a lending perspective, for you to move millions of dollars from one bank to another bank, whoever can give better returns or better service, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I do think so. Okay, great. Well, listen, guys, what I'll do is maybe thank you for that. I think it's a good overview of the different areas of the personalization. I kind of like a lot of those points. Maybe hyper-personalization is too much, right? Maybe we're going too far, and it's hard to define what it is. Is that what we want? But maybe to wrap up, maybe I think as Francis said, if we could play back this video in 5 years' time, what is if you're sitting here today, maybe not your prediction for the future, because I think it's hard to predict, but what's your wish? What's your wish if you could think, what is the thing that we need to achieve, whether it's for the customer or the bank, in the next 5 years? For me personally, the thing I've always thought about from a Bambu perspective is, so again, I bring up my kids a lot. At 21 and 19, they're young, growing adults, but they don't really have much money. Well, however much they keep asking me for, I try to give them as little as possible. But I wish they could get the same quality of advice as somebody who has $1 million, because in reality, we should be able to deliver it. And I truly wish that financial advice was equitable and not based on the amount of money that you need. Of course, there's going to be an edge case for the billionaire, but I still think it's inequitable. I think it's getting much better, but I still think it's inequitable. So over the next 5 years, I think it's improving, but I'd like to get there. Calvin, why don't we go to you first? What's your wish for digital wealth?
Well, I guess I will have two wishes basically, right? One is actually to get advices that suits my profile now and the future. To some extent, what Francis was saying is more of wealth protection and planning at the same time. I think the second wish is from selfishly from a bank perspective, as an employee in a sense. Definitely would like to see ability for us to reach out to clients and when they need it, right? And the right information, the right advice, to even give clients maybe the ability for them to request for certain types of products. I think today we are so rigid and generally from a banking perspective in a sense where client may not be able to do that right now. But I would like to see that change. Hopefully in the future it'll be more fluid.
Makes sense. Understood. And Francis?
Well, I've been evangelizing this for a few years now, but my wish is really for everybody to be able to get advice without strings attached, and that comes especially with this generation because you've seen a lot of people saying that this is the generation, the sandwich generation, right? We've got to look after our parents who didn't plan well enough for their retirement, and we've got to plan for our children's retirement while somehow making ends meet in the middle. So I want the future to be a sort of place where, there is absolutely no more excuse for people to not be able to plan properly for their retirement, for everybody to have the ability and opportunity to accumulate, grow, and decumulate their finances properly at the right stage of life. So this, if you don't mind me mentioning my company a little bit, this is something like, the Fullerton Heritage series of funds, where, there are points in which we know you should accumulate, you should invest a bit more and take a bit more risk to grow. And you need to know where you need to start decumulating. And well, technology is one way in which you can deliver it. Short of that, then it's a matter of ensuring that advice is delivered properly, without too much vested interest from those giving that advice.
Well, look, it's a good point. I think, we all, for us, I think, we all work in this industry, right? We're all part of the people trying to shape it and make it work. And I think it makes sense. I think the whole industry is much better than where it was 5 years ago, even 6 months ago. And I think it is getting better. It's all been driven, to that point. And look, I'm sure I'll be speaking with you both going forward and on that point. But it is everything we can see is pointing towards a better outcome for the institutions. But I think it's not obvious. There's not one answer from that today. So listen, Francis and Calvin, thank you very much. I appreciate you being on the webinar today, talking about that. We'll again, I do hope we'll bring people on in a few years' time. We'll go back and forward. We'll see where it is and how the world looks in the next. You'll maybe have your $1 billion, Francis. We don't know. Maybe that would be a big. Then you can share it with me and Calvin, and we can do financial advice together. Okay.
Let's do that. Of course. See you guys in 5 years on the same panel again.
Let's do that.
Absolutely. Great. Well, listen, I think perfect. So everybody watching, thank you very much. I appreciate you taking the time to watch that. It's another Bambu panel discussion with Calvin and Francis, and we look forward to seeing you next time.